Hello, and welcome to today's presentation. We are really excited to welcome parents and caregivers to this training, since this topic is so important to your daily lives. Today, we will be covering embracing sensory diversity, the importance of sensory spaces, and how to create them. Hello, my name is Tracy Belfield, and I will be one of your co-presenters today. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I was a classroom teacher in a moderate severe classroom for several years, and then went on to become a special education coach and eventually becoming the assistant director of special education in my district before coming on board with the Kentucky Autism Training Center. I am thrilled to be a field training coordinator and being able to support parents, caregivers, school staff, and all of the things that need to be taken care of. You will also be hearing from my co-presenter, Lindsay Eubanks. She is also part of the Kentucky Autism Training family and is a family community field training coordinator. She is also an occupational therapist by trade. So we are really excited that she is joining us in today's presentation. As you will note on the side, there is a memo that if you have access to an occupational therapist, it's always best to consult with them. So as parents and caregivers, you often have access to in-school occupational therapists, so you can ask them questions and kind of pick their brain on things that you need. Also, some of you may have outside therapists outside of the school setting. So again, feel free to consult with them on any questions and concerns that you may have, because occupational therapists really are the most knowledgeable about these sensory needs. So we have three objectives we really want to hit today. The first one is to educate about sensory diversity, and Lindsay will do a great job of kind of helping us through that. And then we're going to highlight the necessity of sensory spaces and rooms. Again, we're going to really talk about both, and really honestly, we're going to focus more on those spaces because we know not everybody has a full room to dedicate to this type of thing. So we're going to talk about how you can use those really small spaces and still meet the needs of individuals. And then, of course, we want to equip you with the knowledge and tools to create that inclusive, sensory-friendly space within your respective environment that you have. So the first thing we're going to talk about is simply understanding the sensory needs and sensory diversity. And I say simply, but it's really not that simple. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lindsay Eubanks, our occupational therapist.
What exactly are sensory needs or sensory processing differences? The term sensory needs or sensory processing refers to the unique ways individuals perceive, interpret, and respond. Perceive meaning to take in the sensory input, such as sights, smells, sounds, etc., from the environment and bodies to the brain. Interpret means to organize, filter, integrate the input, and decide how to react. And respond, that's spitting back out a response, ideally an adaptive response. An adaptive response indicates that the sensory information has been effectively received, interpreted, and organized by the brain. A person can produce an appropriate and functional reaction, a motor and behavioral reaction. For example, if a child hears a loud noise and then covers their ears, this action can be considered an adaptive response to the sensory input because it helps them cope with the discomfort caused by the noise. Or if a person feels unsteady while walking and adjusts their posture to maintain balance, they're making an adaptive response to movement input. So adaptive responses are seen as key indicators of sensory processing development. They are building more sophisticated neural connections. Now, there are different manifestations of sensory processing. There are 4 main sensory processing patterns in the literature for individuals with sensory processing differences. Some are similar, but it all comes down to the responses of the individual. There are passive responses or active responses as to how you would categorize each sensory processing pattern. The first one is hypersensitivity, hyposensitivity, sensory seeking, and sensory avoiding. Let's first look at sensory seeking. This is what I call a high threshold or a large gas tank type of sensory processing pattern, and it has an active response. If you see the picture here, it is a very large cup, and the person needs a lot of sensory input to go into the cup to feel regulated. That's why we call it a large tank. It's really a craving for sensory experiences, and it can often be confused with hyposensitive or under-responsive or low registration, because they also look like they're seeking input. So someone who would be considered sensory seeking or high threshold, high large gas tank type of sensory processor may exhibit constantly touching people or objects, jumping, spinning or rocking, fidgeting, taking risks. They're the ones that enjoy loud noises. They enjoy being touched and tickled. Hyposensitivity is very similar with the high threshold large gas tank, but they're more passive in their responses. They have a reduced registration of sensory input, which means they need more sensory input to even experience or respond. They may be clumsy. They have some trouble with personal physical boundaries. They might be indifferent to pain and temperature. They do have a constant need to touch others, a failure to understand personal space, and an inability to sit still for long periods of time. Those are just some manifestations. Now, the other side of that coin is the sensory avoiding, and this would be a small gas tank. So if you see this picture, it's everything's full because they have a small cup, a small gas tank, and it doesn't take much input to feel overwhelmed. And with the sensory avoiding, they are more active in their responses. It can often be confused with over-responsivity or hypersensitivity. But again, the response pattern is the difference. So sensory avoiders are more active. They actively avoid the stimulation. They may run away from loud, busy environments. They cover their ears when overstimulated by noise. They may wear gloves to avoid touching certain materials, such as paint. And then the hypersensitivity, or the over-responsivity, again, has a low threshold or a small gas tank, but they're more passive in their responses. They still have a heightened sensitivity to sensory input. They are overwhelmed by sensory information, but they may not try to actively avoid the overstimulation. Instead, they just may display frustration. They may be easily distracted, irritable, cautious, and still uncomfortable in loud or bright environments. It is important to remember that a person can have one pattern in one environment and a totally opposite pattern within a different scenario. So no one responds the same to all sensory input. And a fun fact, an individual's sensory processing style may be a major factor in their personality development. That's from Aaron and Aaron. So what exactly does sensory processing include? The first sensory processing system we're going to discuss is visual processing. Pretty obvious, that means your sight or your vision. It uses the eyes to collect information, and then the brain interprets it. It works very closely with other systems. It helps us safely navigate and locate objects in our environment. Some differences may look like if a student or a child or even an adult is having difficulties with visual processing, they may have trouble focusing, be easily distracted, overstimulated in busy visual environments, such as classrooms with wall-to-wall posters or things hanging from the ceiling. They may have trouble with reading and visual tracking, and they may have difficulty tolerating changes in light, like fluorescent lights, or going from inside to outside. The next system is auditory processing, or sound and hearing. This sense helps us detect noise and sound and process it in the brain. And it helps us determine if a sound is dangerous, alerting, quiet, or calm, and very important for listening, communication, and social skills. Differences might look like misinterpreting verbal information. That would be under-responsive. They are not registering the verbal information well. They might miss parts of sentences. That's also under-responsive. or they might be overwhelmed from certain sounds. That would be more over-responsive. Next is touch tactile processing, and this is mostly around pressure, pain, vibration, and temperature. We have receptors in the skin, and it sends information about the location and quality of touch. And it allows a child to determine what they're touching when they're not looking. So reaching into a backpack to pull out a pencil instead of a marker. Differences might look like differences with body awareness, hand use, motor planning. They might be sensitive to clothing tags, textures, getting their hands dirty, avoiding walking on grass. Or on the opposite end of that, they might be seeking a lot of touch input, such as fidgeting, playing with textures and substances, mud, sand, and sometimes even feces. Or smell is the next one, and obviously we have receptors in our nose, and that picks information up about smells that are around us, and it helps us create the flavors we taste in food. And this sense is very linked to our memories and can affect mood. Differences look like craving and seeking out smells with no regard to safety, smelling people or objects, or on the other end, they might gag from smells that most people can tolerate. Gustatory or taste sense, that helps us discriminate between food flavors like sweet, sour, bitter, and the information is received through our taste buds on the tongue. Differences might look like very picky eaters, which is also linked to tactile sensitivity. Differences may also look like they're craving oral input. That can also be a part of seeking. And meal times can be very challenging when you have difficulties with your taste receptors. So those are the five main senses that we all discuss, that we all know about. But there are some lesser known specialized sensory systems that do have a powerful effect on the central nervous system. So we're going to look at those. The first one is the vestibular sense, and another way to say that is movement processing. So knowing where your head is in space, it really affects our balance. So when we move our head, there's fluid in our inner ear and it moves around, and it gives our brain information about the position of our head. It tells us when we are moving, the direction, and the speed of that movement, and it's very important for posture, balance, and coordination. It provides us with what's called gravitational security, which means we can feel safe when our feet are off the ground without falling. So differences might look like what the opposite of that would be gravitational insecurity, which means people who fear their feet being off the ground. They avoid climbing, they avoid slides, they don't like to tip their head back in the shower. They have some difficulties on escalators and curbs. Or they have constant movement, they're seeking movement all the time. And this can really impact motor planning and coordination tasks. They may resist unfamiliar tasks, prefer repetitive play, or they may appear bossy because they need to control the situation into activities that they can tolerate. The next sense is the proprioceptive sense. Another way to say that is a body awareness sense, and it's the sense of knowing where our joints and limbs are positioned. There are receptors in your muscles and your joints, and they are stimulated when you experience any kind of pressure or move your limbs to push or pull, lift or hang. And it allows you to determine your body position in space. And it allows you to regulate the amount of force to use and the direction of body parts. If you are reaching around in the dark for your phone, you're using your proprioceptive sense. Now, differences might look like they have either too heavy or too loose pressure when they're writing or coloring. Sometimes they can be described as a bull in a china shop. They can be very heavy-footed, slamming doors, pushing chairs in too hard, and not intentionally. They don't realize they're doing this. Breaking things often, bumping into things often. They're the kids with bruises that they don't know where they came from. And I've heard an autistic once put it as if they close their eyes, it feels like they're falling off the earth because they have no sense of where their body is without their vision. So that is a way to explain proprioception. And then the last sense we're going to talk about is a newly recognized sense. It's always been there, but we have never really given a name to it until more recently. And it's called interoception. And that is the sense of signals that come from inside your body. So such as your heart beating, breathing, knowing if you're hungry, knowing if you have to use the restroom. And it does have a language cognition component, meaning you have to be able to label it. And there's some mindfulness that comes with that. So differences might look like not knowing or recognizing when you're hungry or full or thirsty, delays with toilet training, either daytime or nighttime. Even identifying when you're tired might be hard. They can be oversensitive or not sensitive enough to pain. Might have difficulty pinpointing symptoms of illness. They just know they feel bad, but they can't figure out exactly what the symptom is. They might have some difficulty identifying emotions in the self or others. And difficulty recognizing building signs of distress. So they might not realize their needs until they're in a full meltdown. So it's really hard for them to use coping strategies, even if they've learned them in the time of distress. So how do sensory needs affect our regulation and daily functioning? First, they help us regulate our emotions, behavior, and attention. Sensory processing differences can significantly influence how individuals regulate their emotions, behavior, and attention. For many, sensory input can either be calming or overstimulating, which directly affects their ability to stay focused and manage their feelings. It's very important to remember that we have to meet sensory needs. When sensory needs are properly met, individuals are better able to engage with their surroundings. They can absorb new information and they can participate socially. Conversely, when sensory needs are not met or ignored or not accommodated for, it can lead to dysregulation. And that's where a person just becomes overwhelmed, anxious, or distracted. It also impacts our ability to engage in self-care, sleep, social interactions, motor skills. Some ways it can affect self-care, specifically, routines like brushing teeth, taking a shower, or getting dressed might be difficult if certain textures or sensations are uncomfortable or distressing. Can affect sleep patterns. For example, if you have sensitivity to noise or light, it can make it difficult to fall or stay asleep. Socially, situations like loud environments, strong smells, or crowded spaces, it can lead to discomfort or withdrawal, impacting the ability to socialize and form connections. And then motor skills. Sensory processing can really influence coordination and motor skills. And that affects tasks like fine motor control or balance, such as fine motor skills like writing, cutting with scissors, or sports activities. A lot of kids with sensory processing differences avoid sports or more gross motor tasks because their bodies won't let them do it naturally. They have to be taught more specifically, more explicitly. And then focus and attention. Overstimulation or lack of sensory input can really make it difficult to concentrate, which affects academics, work productivity, and the ability just to follow basic instructions. Now, some thoughts about the experiences of autistic individuals and their sensory challenges. First off, we have to know that sensory challenges are a part of the diagnosis criteria for autism in the section B. And the exact wording is hyper or hyporeactivity to sensory input or unusual interest in sensory aspects of the environment. For example, apparent indifference to pain and temperature, adverse response to specific sounds or textures, excessive smelling or touching of objects, visual fascination with lights or movement. So sensory processing is a diagnostic criteria. Second, we have to remember that autistic individuals often experience sensory differences much more intensely and much more frequently than others. And it can feel like a trauma response, so a fight, flight, or freeze response. When someone's experiencing sensory overload, it's important to remember this. And what's the first thing to go in a trauma response? It's usually the use of higher level language skills and cognitive abilities that rely on the frontal lobe of the brain. This means when you say use your words to a kid who's in a meltdown, it's probably not going to work because their words are not accessible at the moment. We should also be mindful to use as few words as possible in these moments. They might not be able to verbalize what they need or even know what they need in that moment. And they definitely cannot process a lot of words coming from us. And we have to remember that each autistic experience is uniquely their own. So if we understand this, we can help create environments and supports that are more comfortable and accommodating for their specific sensory needs. And a few other points, we have to remember that while sensory differences can present challenges, they can also be a source of unique strength and perspectives. So not all sensory experiences are negative, and many autistic individuals find deep joy in certain sensory experiences, like the feel of soft textures, the sight of specific colors, or sound of particular music or rhythms. If you've heard of the ASMR phenomenon, this is a good example of this, where they listen to just everyday objects repeatedly. And sometimes stimming behaviors like hand flapping or jumping are simply expressions of happiness. It doesn't always mean they're in distress. Sensory processing differences also can be described as sensory diversity. And we have to remember that these differences, again, are not inherently negative, and it may just be a simple variation of how some experience the world. Everyone has a unique profile, and we have to recognize that these are natural and part of the human experience. This helps us promote more inclusive and supportive settings. And we have to recognize the need for accommodating so that they feel comfortable and they can function effectively in various settings. This could include providing quiet spaces, offering sensory tools like fidgets or noise-canceling headphones, and being mindful of sensory triggers in the environment, such as schools, workplaces, and public spaces. And accommodations are not about fixing the person, but rather about creating environments that are inclusive and supportive of everyone's needs. There is an architect in New York. His name is Jonas Schatz. His goal is to develop a building code for cognitive and neurological disabilities that is equivalent to the American with Disabilities Act, or ADA. He says, we have building codes that protect people with disabilities we can see, but we lack the same codified protection for people whose disabilities we can't see. And there is a link to this article in the PDF. So how can you support autistic individuals? Creating sensory-friendly environments. We have to consider lighting, smells, perfumes, candles, textures, visual clutter. Whenever possible, use light covers or natural lighting to create a calmer space. Think about providing different seating options to allow for movement. Providing sensory tools, making sure there are a variety, like fidgets, headphones, seating with movement options, and snacks that offer different sensory experiences, like beef jerky, gum, sour gummies, mints. They can really make a big difference in helping someone regulate. And providing picture visuals of common sensory tools and preferences can also be beneficial, especially for those who might find it hard to express themselves when they're feeling overstimulated. Offering predictability and preparation for sensory changes. Trying to keep a visual schedule handy and encourage people to check items off as they go. This helps build a sense of predictability. Whenever possible, give them a heads up about any changes using both visuals and words. And if an unexpected change does come up, it's helpful if they've had some pre-teaching of the regulation strategies they can use, like social stories for handling change, visual timers, first then boards, deep breathing techniques, or calming toys. For example, you might show them a video of what a fire drill might look like, or what to do if their favorite ice cream flavor is out before it happens, so that they can be prepared when it happens. Respecting individual sensory preferences and needs. As much as you can, try to avoid overwhelming someone with too much sensory input. Give them space and time they need to engage in sensory activities that help them regulate. Maybe that means extra alone time after a busy day at the fair, or letting them stand while they're doing their work, or watching a movie if they need to rock, or stand while they're watching a movie or if they need to rock, or keeping the radio volume low if it bothers them, using paper towels instead of loud hand dryers. The key is to be flexible and accommodating because everyone's needs are different. Understanding that stimming and other sensory-seeking behaviors are important. It's crucial to approach these sensory preferences with compassion and understanding. And remember, they can't control how their brain processes sensory input. It's very important to validate their experiences, even if they are different from your own. And I think we all could use a little bit of that these days.
Thank you, Lindsay, for all that wonderful information that you shared. I hope everybody has found that beneficial. So now let's kind of move into kind of the application part. And we're going to talk a little bit about the benefits of sensory spaces and corners. Again, creating a sensory space is a practical and very impactful way to support individuals with diverse sensory needs. Even with the limited space, it's possible to design an effective sensory area. So let's explore how to do this, starting with understanding the importance of these spaces in various settings. Providing a safe, calming space for sensory regulation. Sensory spaces serve as sanctuaries for potentially overwhelming environments. They offer a controlled environment. Sensory spaces allow for careful preparation of sensory input. This control is crucial for individuals who may be easily overwhelmed by the unpredictable sensory experiences of typical environments. Predictability. The consistent nature of a well-designed sensory space provides a sense of security. Users know what to expect, reducing anxiety and promoting a feeling of safety. Personalization. These spaces can be tailored to meet the individual needs, offering specific sensory tools or experiences that are known to be calming to the user. Escape from overstimulation. A sensory space offers a retreat where individuals can decompress and reset their sensory systems. And lastly, positive associations. Over time, users will often develop positive association with these spaces, viewing them as safe havens where they can relax and self-regulate. Promoting self-regulation and reducing sensory overload. Sensory spaces are powerful tools for fostering self-regulation. Recognition of needs. Regular use of sensory spaces can help individuals become more aware of their sensory needs and states of regulation or dysregulation. Autonomy and regulation. These spaces empower individuals to take an active role in managing their own sensory experiences, helping them to promote independence and self-efficiency. Diverse regulation strategies. Well-designed sensory spaces offer multiple options for regulation, allowing users to experiment and discover what works best for them. Proactive management. By providing a space for regular sensory breaks, these areas can help prevent sensory overload before they even occur. And lastly, stress reduction. The calming environment of a sensory space can lower stress hormones and promote a more balanced physiological state. Enhancing focus, concentration, overall well-being. There are many benefits of a sensory space beyond just the immediate regulation positively impacting various aspects of their functioning. There is improved attention. After using a sensory space, many individuals report enhanced ability to focus on tasks. The opportunity to regulate can help clear that mental fog and reduce distracting sensory input. Increase productivity. By providing regular opportunities for regulation, sensory spaces can help maintain optimal arousal levels for different tasks. Better emotional regulation. The physiological calming effects of a sensory space often translate to improved emotional control, reducing instances of emotional outbursts or even shutdowns. Enhanced learning. In educational settings, access to sensory spaces can better support information process and the retention by ensuring students are in that optimal state of learning. Parents, this is a big one for you. Improved sleep patterns. Regular use of a calming sensory space, especially before bedtime, can contribute to better sleep quality and duration. Then there are social benefits. When individuals are well regulated, they often are better equipped to engage in social interactions, potentially improving relations and reducing that social anxiety. Physical health. Stress reduction and improved regulation can positively impact your physical health, potentially reducing that stress-related health issues. And then lastly, self-esteem and confidence. As individuals become more adept at managing their own sensory needs, they often experience an increased confidence in their abilities to navigate various environments. Creating a sensory space or corner is a practical and very impactful way to support individuals with diverse sensory needs, even with limited space, which in a home we know is often very limited. It's possible to design an effective sensory area. So let's explore how to do this, starting with understanding the importance of these various spaces. The importance of a sensory room in the various settings. First, I know I'm gearing towards caregivers, but you guys obviously work with your school staffs. So it's important to know that in classrooms or any educational setting, sensory spaces are an invaluable space to support diverse learners. They offer a safe space for the student to regulate their own sensory input. They support the student with those attention difficulties we mentioned earlier. They are a tool for managing those challenging behaviors, and they have the potential to improve the overall classroom dynamics and learning outcomes. In the home, the domestic sensory spaces can be crucial for family harmony and individual well-being. They provide a dedicated area for sensory regulation and relaxation. They help support our daily transitions and routines. They're a tool for managing those sensory-related meltdowns and shutdowns, and they really have the potential to improve our sleep patterns and just the overall levels of stress within the family. Again, many of you deal with healthcare settings, so it's important to know that in medical settings, sensory spaces can significantly enhance patient experiences, helping to reduce anxiety before procedures, supporting individuals with sensory sensitivities during their hospital stays, and providing a calming environment for individuals with such things as dementia and other cognitive impairments. So again, these benefit our autistic young people, but also other people as well. And then lastly is just public spaces. And Lindsay kind of mentioned how there's some architectures out there that are looking to increase accessibility in public spaces. So it's important that incorporating sensory-friendly areas in public spaces like libraries, museums, even shopping centers can really help increase that accessibility and inclusion for all diverse learners. So let's look at some key elements of designing a sensory room or a sensory space. There are some things that you want to consider to engage different senses of the body. So the first one we're going to talk about is lighting. You can look at some adjustable lighting, dimmer switches, colored lights are great for this. You can also look for light projectors or lava lamps are kind of back out in stores, and those create some great visual stimulation for students. Again, for every child, they're not going to want that stimulation, and so you may need to look at something like blackout curtains or shades to help reduce that light. Next is sound. For sound dampening, you may want to look at carpets, or you can find some acoustic panels to put on the wall, pretty cheap nowadays. There's also white noise machines, calming music players. Again, for those students that want less sound coming in, noise canceling headphones are a great option. Then there are tactile elements. You really want to include as many different tactile elements as possible, because your child is going to want different things on different days oftentimes, but we'll also kind of talk about how to figure out exactly what is best for them as we get into that discussion. But again, look for various textures. So you're going to want soft things, and you may find like soft silky things, soft velvety things, bumpy things, textured like those flip sequins that were popular a few years ago, but they're still on some items that you can get. Fidget toys, those are kind of all over the place now, so you can find them just about in any store, and there's lots of different options with that. Stress balls are usually easy to obtain, and again, there's different types of stress balls. Some are really firm and take a lot of pressure to kind of squeeze. Some are super squeezy and soft. Weighted blankets and lap pads are also a great option. And then you want to think about the proprioceptive input. So for that, crash pads are great, and not everybody's familiar with crash pads, so just to kind of give you a brief description, They are typically a rectangle, kind of cushion-filled item that children can just literally fall into or crash into, hence the name. Bean bags are also a good choice for this. Resistance bands can be put at the bottom of chairs to kind of give that resistance when they're swinging their legs or pushing their legs. There's also squeeze machines and hug chairs. And then there is vestibular stimulation. So for that, items like rocking chairs, swings, balance boards, wobble cushions, spinning seats. I think you can still get sit and spin toys in the toy aisle. Visual organization. Now this one can be tricky because when you're developing a sensory space, you're trying to put all those different things in there for your child, but you still want to make sure that it's visually organized. So if you can store things in clear storage tubs, that way you can see what is inside them, but things are kind of put up in an organized way. If you can provide a visual schedule or choice boards so that children can pick what it is that they need and want access to during that time, it's great. And really just try to keep that visual clutter to a minimum. Again, you don't want to put up things on the wall or even in the floor and ceiling that don't serve a purpose. We're not putting things up just to kind of be cutesy in the room or space that we're utilizing. And then there's olfactory considerations. So again, you need to know your child and what they like and prefer. You may need to look at kind of doing a scent-free area or using only natural scents. Essential oil diffusers can work with some children, and in some children, again, it's a little bit too much. So just use those cautiously. You may even talk to your doctor about that and see what their view is on it. But again, just caution with that one. And then the last thing to consider is that temperature control. So again, if we need to cool it down, we've got fans or other personal cooling devices. I know there's even those cooling towels that you can lay across your neck and they stay cool for hours. For some individuals, they're going to kind of want more of that warm, cozy space. So putting some different textured blankets in there, maybe even a heating pad. Again, it really just depends on the type of elements your child is going to be looking for. So let's start looking at some practical tips and strategies for creating sensory spaces within limited spaces, because again, we know in homes you don't always have a lot of room to create something like this. So corners in your house can be a great option. Corners naturally create a sense of enclosure and can be easily transformed into a cozy sensory nook. So kind of like in the picture here, you see it looks like just took a hula hoop and they put some fabric around it and kind of made that nice little corner. Something like that would make a great sensory space. Room dividers can also help create a nice sensory space. Of course, they're portable. They can be stood up when need be, taken down when need be. And again, if you need to replace the fabric on those, that's an easy change to make as well. Repurposing closets. If you have a spare closet in your home, you can convert that into a nice little sensory space because it's nice and compact. I recommend taking the door off and putting more of a curtain up there just so that it doesn't feel like a seclusion type thing, but really just a little cozy sanctuary for the child. Vertical space. This is a very underutilized thing that can make a really big impact. So again, think about what can you put up on the walls to maximize any of their sensory needs and fulfilling that. So you can mount things, and you see here in the picture, they've just taken different objects, but also different textures and mounted them to the wall. So those are all great options. Flexible furniture is really good. You kind of see here with the kids, they're on a little couch thing, but it can be rearranged so they can make a fort and therefore kind of again make that sensory space. You can see where they made the little like bridge, but that can create a lot of different sensory opportunities for them as well, both climbing over it, kind of laying on it to where their head's laying back. So flexible furniture, if that is an option. is a great choice. Sensory tents are fun, usually very inexpensive. Again, they're kind of portable, so you can pop them up when you need them. And if you need that space, you can take them down and kind of use it as a multi-purpose area. So those are just things that you can look for. Really, anytime you can kind of use multi-use spaces, that would be ideal. So that's what some of the things that we said in the home, such as the tent and even the room divider, are things that can allow you to use multi-spaces. But try to think about that. You see here in one of the pictures, they've got an outdoor space. So again, it can be a great little garden thing, but they put lots of different sensory textures in there, different walking paths in there. Also, if you can focus on portability, because again, our students are going to leave our homes. We are going to be going out into the public and other places. So when we can bring sensory items with us, that's a great option. So even using, like in one picture, you see a pencil box there. And of course, you could have various sensory tools within that. In that particular one, they have kinetic sand, and they've kind of hidden other items in there to where the student or child can play with those throughout the day. The other picture there has boards with different sensory tools on them. So again, these are things that you could take with you, but they're also things that you could mount on the wall, like if you put some Velcro on the back. So again, it's kind of using that space that's underutilized in the home, but if it's attached with something like Velcro, it becomes portable. The next one you see like a little caddy. Again, you can fill that with various sensory tools. The Therapy is the one that's kind of facing you right now. The next picture there are like what we would refer to as busy bags. So it's full of sand and there's items hidden kind of inside of it. So it kind of becomes like a hide and seek, but it's also sensory because they're squishing the bag and moving it around. I've also kind of seen this same idea when they use hair gel and they had the items in there, but again, kind of that squishy feeling when they're utilizing those sensory bags. I do suggest if you're making a homemade sensory bag like that, just like in this picture, that you reinforce it with some duct tape, because we all know our kids can get a little squish happy, and so things can leak out. So if we reinforce it with some duct tape, that can be very helpful. If you don't want to use sand, rice is another great thing that can be used in those bags. So again, you just want to think about the multi-use spaces and portability of things. All right, so we know you may be very motivated to try some of these ideas, but we know money, especially in today's economy, is always a big deal. So we have included in our resource folder lots of do-it-yourself ideas, and I'm going to go over some other cost-effective solutions for you. So repurpose household items when you can. Holiday lights, for example, can be great for adding that ambient lighting. Create textured boards from household items that you already have around the house. Make some weighted items using rice, beans. You can fill socks with those items and they create nice weighted items. Go to thrift stores and yard sales looking for things like that soft fabric, interesting textures, other potential sensory tools. And when you look at items, try to look at them and not their common everyday use. For example, a paintbrush. If it's a brand new paintbrush, again, we're not thinking of just painting with it, but the bristles and the textures and the movement of those. How will our children look at those and possibly use those things? You can make some great do-it-yourself sensory bottles that create great calming sensory stimuli. Usually you can fill those bottles with water, glitter, and other food coloring. I've also seen people add oil to them to kind of help a little bit more with the floating of things. There's lots of different ways to make your own lap pads, simply just sewing things, fabric together, and again, adding that rice, bean, or even poly pellets to that. You can create your own do-it-yourself crash pads by using old pillows and blankets to create that soft landing space. I just kind of caution you, again, think about your child, the weight of your child, and make sure you're making that thick enough that when they crash into it, that there's enough cushion to impact and break that so that they don't bump their head or body into the floor. You can make your own fidget toys. There's lots of everyday items that you can kind of utilize, key rings, beads, rubber bands, things like that that you can make simple fidgets out of. Again, you know your child best, their age, their developmental level, to know what items that you can safely give them, but just be mindful of those things. Again, you can create a cozy corner using blankets and pillows. I know as a kid, just creating forts was one of my most favorite things. And so those can create some great memories, but also help provide those sensory inputs that the students need. Visual supports are always a must. So you can take, and laminate paper. You can get small whiteboards and just kind of write down choices or schedules. You can use tape and go over visual supports and kind of laminate items that way if you don't have a laminator in your home. So again, Scotch tape, packing tape, anything like that can kind of help do it yourself lamination. Another great thing is just cardboard boxes. Again, these can create great little sensory cubbies, hideouts, but they can also be lots of other sensory options for kids. Like I said, we're going to have tons of resources in our resource folder for you. All right. So, when possible, I want you to involve your child in the design process. I want you to include the autistic individual in designing that sensory space, because that's really going to help make it the most effective and personalized space available for them. So how are you going to do that? Well, if possible, you're going to do a direct consultation, which is really just talking to your child about their sensory preferences and needs, asking them questions like, what helps them feel calm? What sensory experiences do they enjoy or find challenging? Again, this is all going to depend on the level of communication your child has, of how much consultation you'll be able to have. But I just think too often we skip over the step of just asking them, and we try to start doing these things ourselves. Another option, and this may be a little bit more helpful if your student doesn't have a lot of language or doesn't have a good way of communicating yet, but even for speaking students or children, just simply observe them. Try to pay attention to the sensory seeking or the sensory avoiding behaviors. Again, see what they just naturally go to or avoid, and try to make note of those things. Sensory exploration sessions. Provide different sensory tools and observe which ones they gravitate towards, or again, which ones they're avoiding. You may talk to their classroom teacher about what are they going to in the classroom, what are they avoiding. Gradual introduction. So as you're kind of maybe thinking of ideas, you might introduce that to the environment, again, one at a time, so that you can kind of take note of how they're responding to that addition and just see how it goes. And again, if it's successful, obviously we're going to keep it. If they're avoiding it, we're going to remove it. Respect communication styles. Remember, communication isn't always verbal. They don't always use mouth words. So pay attention to those nonverbal cues. They often help us understand their preferences as well. Obviously, if they're covering their ears, whatever sound is going on is probably something they're not liking. If they're resistant to touch something, again, it may be something with the texture that they don't enjoy. So we just need to respect that because they are communicating with us. Offer choices, choices, choices. Again, I feel like too often we just put things in their environment and expect them to enjoy it. But just like we have preferences, they have preferences. So present options, let them make those decisions, and then respect those decisions that they make. So just give choices. Ongoing feedback. Again, they may like one thing today, and 6 months from now, they may not like it or enjoy it anymore. Just like our preferences change, their preferences are going to change. So you kind of regularly want to check in and make sure that the space that you have created is working for them. Obviously, the space you created for them when they were 5 years old is going to look different than when they're 12 years old. So again, we just constantly want to be checking in with that. And I'm really big about just empowering our children, allow them to have a say in decision making. So again, let them kind of tell us, which again, the direct consultation, the observation, the respect in their communication style, offering choices, all of that is listening to them and really helping to empower them and letting them know that they do have control over their environment and that they do have a voice and a say. And then consider sensory sensitivities in the design process itself. The act of designing is going to be overwhelming for some of you. You're like, oh, I want to do this, but there's so much to consider. Again, break it up into small, manageable steps. Provide breaks as needed. Again, do things gradual introduction. That way it's not overwhelming to yourself in designing it or to your child that you're designing the space for. And then if you're really having trouble kind of getting some of this from your child and figuring out what's working and not working, you may involve an autistic adult. If you, again, know somebody or have access to somebody, and you can just try to get some insight from their lived experiences. Again, we know all autistic individuals are different. When you've met one, you've met one. But again, if you have no other way of getting information, this may be a great way to do that. So we're not quite done yet, so please don't log off just yet. But I do want to tell you, in creating sensory spaces, even with this limited area, it's achievable, it's worthwhile, your children are going to love it. By understanding the importance of these spaces, incorporating all of the different key sensory elements, utilizing these practical spaces for small areas, exploring these cost-effective solutions, and most importantly, involving your autistic child in the design process, we can create effective sensory spaces that truly meet the needs of your users. And Lindsay and I would absolutely love to see some pictures of what you created. So you see here on our screen our email addresses. Please, if you follow some of the steps in this training, we would love to see these pictures. These sensory spaces that you create really do have the potential to significantly improve the quality of life, enhancing learning and productivity and promoting overall well-being for individuals with diverse sensory needs. As we continue to recognize and value neurodiversity, the implementation of sensory spaces will represent a concrete steps in creating a more inclusive and supportive environment for all. So here is the link to our resource folder that, like I said, is chock full of ideas and recipes to make some of these different things. You can also take the camera on your phone and scan the QR code to be able to access this resource folder. Also, hopefully you know the Kentucky Autism Training Center offers a wide variety of trainings and supports. So we really want you to follow us really on all of our social media platforms, but pick one or two of your favorites if it's too overwhelming for you. Again, our website, kyautism.org, chock full of such great valuable information for parents, caregivers, professionals, everybody. Of course, we have our YouTube video channel, which is probably where you're watching this video at. And then we have our traditional social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and X. So again, all of those links are on the screen and you can scan the QR code. And then lastly, please, please, please scan this QR code or go to the link there on the screen and give us your feedback on what you think about these training videos. It really helps us to know what you need, what you want to see more of, how impactful these things are. You also have an opportunity while you're completing the evaluation to enter into our quarterly drawing. So again, we give out some really cool prizes for that. I just thank you for being here today and everything that you do to help support your child. If you need anything, feel free to reach out to us.